Hi, in today's video we're going to talk about how to test your soil health and why you should. We're going to talk about all the interesting creatures that are coming back to populate this soil since we've begun to graze it and cover seed it. And we're going to talk about some of the different methods that you can use as a farmer or rancher right on your property without having to go to a lab to test your soil health. So let's get after it. Welcome to my latest video, how to test the soil health on your land and why you should. A few things we're going to go over in this video quickly are why you would want to test the soil health on your land, the protocols involved, what you can see with the naked eye, and then what we can see with a microscope. And these are all testing procedures that hopefully you can do on your land without having to go to a lab. And obviously there's some really cool things that we can do with laboratory analysis of the soil and the soil organic matter, but that's not what we're going to get into today. Today we're going to talk about real practical things that you can do on the farm right now, and you can go back to being that farmer scientist that this country is really founded on, people that were connected to the land and knew that firsthand observation was one of the most powerful aspects of science. So let's start with why. Obviously, there's parallels and connections to your own internal gut biome. If we've got a healthy biome in the soil, we know that that's going to produce healthy plants that can fight off pathogens. So that's going to produce healthy food that's going to feed our bodies and our gut biome and just lead us to healthier lives. Second reason we want to do this is to track and adjust practices. We want to know which cover crops are helping the soil, which cover crops are not helping the soil at certain times, certain seasons, and certain circumstances. We want to know if our grazing practices are benefiting our soil and our soil organic matter, SOM, or if they're, hindering what we're trying to do. And of course, a big piece of why is to establish a baseline to know where you started, so that this isn't just theory, these are practical numbers you can track into the future. So let's get into the protocols a little bit. Obviously, you want to organize the information that you're going to capture here. We want time and date, and each comparison should be met in kind. And what I mean by that is you want to make sure that if you're taking a sample, that the season matches along with time of day. And then, of course, with the sample locations, you want to have those marked. And, one of the simple ways to do that is just to have some T-posts that are marked throughout the farm so that you can go X amount of distance within that T-post, let's call it 50 feet, and take a sample and know what you're getting year to year, season to season from that spot. So that we've covered protocols, let's get into what we can see with the naked eye. And this is actually really basic but valuable information. One of the first things we might see is visible fungal mycelia. And that's going to be that thread-like white fibers, that overcome like a rotten tomato, something you might see, where the fungus just overtakes dead and decaying matter and then regenerates that into useful metabolites into the soil. Another thing that we're going to observe with the naked eye is going to be crop resiliency and yield. And these are going to be pretty obvious, but again, you're going to want to measure these so that you know year to year real numbers that you're seeing. So per acre yields would be a great way to do that. Moisture retention. Again, you want real numbers here, but you can kind of go with your gut on this. If it's July and you haven't had rain for 3 weeks, but you can dig your fingers down into that soil and still feel some moisture, that's a pretty good test. Rain infiltration. So this is a real easy test, and there are scientific ways to measure this, and I can link to a video, and I'll throw the link above here on some good procedures on how to do this. But even with the naked eye, you can kind of tell when you get a downpour, which we get a lot of here in Kansas, where all of a sudden you get 1 inch to 2, maybe 3 inches of rain in a real short period of time. You want the soil to be able to absorb that rain. If we have regenerative practices, we know that that water is going to go into the soil, be held by the soil organic matter into the plant roots, used by the plants, and then in turn used by the livestock later on. So, a really good test there. One of my favorites, earthworm castings. And you know that you're a happy organic or natural integrated farmer when you go out and you just find these piles of this dark black earthworm castings piled up on the soil because all this dead carbon has been turned into nutrients, and these little engineers have worked their way through the soil. And honestly, it's a bunch of free employees that you get just by not spraying chemicals on your land. Tied in with the earthworm castings are going to be obviously the rate of digestion of organic residues. So, dead leaf fall, anything that we have brush hogged, anything that we've knocked over, we want to see how quickly that gets digested back into the soil. So, that's going to be obviously you want to come up with a measurement for that, but that's going to be something that we can keep track of. A key indicator is going to be dark and crumbly topsoil. That dark terra preta soil that just is so rich and alive. And then one of my favorites, and I'll tie another link in here to a video that we did on 80 acres of property that had been soybeans, and then we let go natural and graze, and all of a sudden we had dung beetles show up. So one of these indicators is beetle and other macrofauna populations that show up on your property. So these are all things that we can see with the naked eye. Moving on from here, we're going to go into a more specific and measurable way of looking at things, and that's going to be through the microscope. One of the cons on the microscope is going to be a lack of time for systematic sampling and counting, but you can still do that. I still truly believe what I said earlier with the founding fathers and the being in touch with the ground and being those first line observers, is that if you set the time aside for this, it's going to be valuable data for you to know what's working and what's not. A pro is that this is direct observation, and that's science in its purest form. So a few of the things that we could look at under the microscope are going to be protozoa, fungi, nematodes, and bacteria. And one of the ways you can go about this, and we'll tie this back into protocols, is going to be that you can do a count on specific locations. You can compare that year to year and see how that's coming back. Now, obviously, to wrap this video up, laboratory tests are going to be just incredibly valuable to you if you can afford to do that and find a university or a company that is going to do that in your area. These might be able to measure quantity of biomass, biodiversity, and activity, meaning the respiration and enzyme levels of the soil microbiota, and seeing what you've developed in your soil personally on your farm, including the genomic DNA, the biochemical proteins, fatty acids that are used to characterize microbial community in the soil that you have on your farm. So that sounds like a mouthful, but it's just a bunch of useful data that you could get. I really urge you to chart this year from year and see the progress that your improved techniques of natural farming, integrated farming, organic farming, whatever you want to call it, are having on the land. And knowing that when you're affecting that soil, that ties back to the food that you're producing, whether that be crops or plants that the livestock are ingesting, and then the livestock products that you make from there, and the effect that that's having on the world around you. It's just an amazing thing. And you should really do yourself a favor. Just set some time aside and document all this. We'll be back with you another video soon, and I appreciate you tuning into this one.